Thank you to everyone for joining the webinar today. We're going to go through sort of the 101 to accreditation. There are a multitude of reasons that one may want to seek APR, and so I'll go through mine, and then Jen and Cynthia will also offer their reasons for APR. For me, it was definitely a personal and academic pursuit. I'm always looking for additional knowledge and to hone in on my skills. So especially working at an agency, we put together proposals pretty frequently, and so having those credentials behind your name is really helpful for someone who doesn't get to know you. And those skills that you gain by going through the APR process helps you in the planning and reaching objectives rather than doing PR for PR's sake. And so that's always a matter of importance on the agency side. Jen, would you like to offer your thoughts?
Sure. So my name is Jen Rosowski. I am in executive communications currently, and my background is a journalist of about 12 years before transitioning into strategic communications. So with that, I didn't have the theory and background necessary, I thought, for having a full career in communications. I basically learned, like so many of us do, on the job, but I was really fortunate at the time to have an APR as my supervisor, and he encouraged me to get grounded in what I believe to be an excellent program. It creates a foundation in research-driven best practices based on goals and objectives and strategy rather than just the pursuit of tactics. And I thought that that was the most incredible benefit of the APR. Like Kristen, I think this makes me much more of an asset to the organizations that I serve. And I hope that everybody here will find that as well. Thanks. And I'll pass it on to Cynthia.
Thanks. Thanks, Jen. Hi, I'm Cynthia Carey. I am a Senior Public Relations Manager for Kelly Services. I've been there for about 4 years and previously held another job at another corporation. And then, as I like to call it, I grew up in an agency setting. So I was about 5 years into my career as a PR practitioner when I decided to pursue my APR. My undergrad degree is in journalism, so a lot of writing and editing background, not much in terms of theory or principles related to public relations. So that's why I decided to pursue my accreditation. And ironically, the position that I have now with Kelly, my supervisor, is also accredited. And when she was looking to fill the role that I have on the team, she was actually, the job description actually did say that accreditation in public relations was preferred. And when I joined the team, I ended up finding out that that was what my accreditation was, what set me ahead of all the candidates that she was considering as her top candidates for the role. So I guess I do have experience in terms of somebody who is actually benefited not only from like the theory and principles, but actually from an employment opportunity by having my accreditation. So.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. I am going to take on the next part of the webinar that'll talk to us a little bit about the objectives and other facets of why you might want to pursue your APR. And Kristen, if you wouldn't mind helping me to advance the slides, that would be awesome. Thanks. So starting with the objective, some of the reasons that you may want to pursue your accreditation. First of all, learning a little bit about this webinar will help you to understand a little bit about what the accreditation is and why it's important. We're going to walk you through the APR process, which can sometimes seem confusing, but we are definitely a resource here to help you. We're going to talk about some of the many resources that are available to help you achieve success with the APR, and then we will walk you through all of the steps and deadlines for our Detroit PRSA chapter's accreditation process. So what is accreditation? As you see here, this is actually important to read aloud. It's the public relation industry's only national postgraduate certification program and a recognized standard. So as we know, so many industries have various acronyms after their name. They signify a rigorous course of study. This is public relations equivalent. And as you can see in that little starburst off to the right, if you can see, we are excited that you are able to envision APR after your name, and we want to be able to help you get there. The accreditation spans all industries and practice areas. It was established in 1964, and those who have APR after their name, those in the industry, know that it signifies this high level of skill and competency in PR, in the PR field. And it's administered by the Universal Accreditation Board. And as we know, again, accredited professionals are able to put that APR after their name, signifying that they've gone through this rigorous process. So why might you want to seek accreditation? Obviously, Cynthia, Kristen, and I gave some of the examples of why individuals may want to pursue this accreditation. It demonstrates that you're a highly skilled and ethical PR professional, helps elevate your status in the PR profession, has the potential, as Cynthia mentioned, to open doors to career advancement. I too have seen numerous job postings that actually list APR preferred. I know that I would be looking for that in hiring potential people to work for me as well. And very importantly, it enhances your knowledge and skills. Going through the APR definitely makes you a stronger practitioner. I believe that it actually changes the way you think permanently. So it's a great course of study. We're about to go into the various steps to accreditation, and I will hand that off to Kristen to be able to go through those in detail.
Thanks, Jen. So overall, there are 4 basic steps to accreditation, and we'll go through each of these in greater depth, but they include submitting your application to National to show that you're interested in participating. Once your application is approved, then you would fulfill the candidate questionnaire, which again we'll go into in greater depth, but it essentially puts your thoughts together, fulfills phase 1, and can serve as a study guide for your test later on. The 3rd step is to prepare and present for a panel of existing APRs from the Detroit chapter who will evaluate the questionnaire and presentation and then make a recommendation on whether or not you advance or do not advance to the computer-based exam. So again, we'll go through each of these 4 steps in greater depth in the upcoming slides. Firstly, submitting your application. In this webinar presentation, all of these blue links are hyperlinked, and we'll provide this presentation so that you can easily access this information on your own. But the application is simply providing background about who you are and why you want to participate in the APR. It's open to any member in good standing. And what good standing means is that you need to be up to date on your dues, both to National and to the chapter. As a reminder for anyone who hasn't seen that lately, National dues are $260, chapter dues are $80, so for a total of $340 to make sure that you're in good standing. It's recommended that you have 5 years of professional experience, though it's not required. So if you feel like you are ready before you've hit your 5 years, you're certainly welcome to demonstrate that. But based on the exam and the questionnaire, that 5 years seems to be a pretty good milestone to gauge your readiness. Once you submit that application, we ask that you alert Jen and myself to the fact that you've done so, because that will help signify for us that you have submitted that application and that you may need some more resources from the APR committee. Once your application has been approved, you'll move on to the panel presentation candidate questionnaire. And this essentially, you should consider it kind of like a term paper that you may have done in college or high school, because the more thorough you can be, the better prepared you'll be for your presentation and for the test later on. The questions are pre-designated. There are 14 of them. There are 2 parts to it. The first focuses more on your organization and your role, some of the challenges and opportunities that you see in your role or in the profession. And then the second part is really emphasizing experience. So that's looking into a PR plan that you've implemented, and demonstrating all of the various components of PR work and how you've implemented those. So in that portion of the questionnaire, it's best for you to pick a program that is as well-rounded as possible, because you'll be asked questions about your research, planning, implementation, and evaluation that went into that program. You will have to give some indication on the approvals process, whether that's within your department or a client if you're from an agency. And then you'll also have the opportunity to describe what you would have done if you had more resources or authority. So if you have holes in that particular plan in answering some of those questions, that's sort of where you'll offer your thoughts on if you had unlimited resources. So once you have submitted that questionnaire, then the accreditation committee will connect with you to schedule your presentations. Now, please note, we cannot schedule a presentation until we've received your questionnaire, so we're not going to schedule those in advance. So you'll see to the right there that we're recommending that we receive those completed questionnaires by July 29th. And just a note for all of you, we understand that the current environment may change some of these dates, so please give us a little bit of flexibility, but it's a best case scenario. And we'll go through all of the dates one more time toward the end so that you get a better idea of the cadence of all of those dates.
Hey, Kristen, just really quickly, I think one fair point to mention on those panel presentations, when we do coordinate them for the candidates, we do check in with the candidates to make sure there's no conflict of interest, whether it's a client or a former employer or supervisor that might potentially be serving on your panel. So we're always making sure that there's no conflict of interest there when we're scheduling those. So just wanted to point that out.
Thanks, Cynthia. I was going to get to that in a couple of No, it's a good and fair point to reiterate. I know that it's a concern for some of us where we're presenting work that we've done and there may be a client or a department where there'd be some concern there. So thank you, Cynthia, for making sure that we're all aware. In reaffirming the panel presentation scheduling, again, we would work towards scheduling those the week of August 10th. And that's not to mean that we would schedule all of the panel presentations the week of August 10th. That would be where we're coordinating with you to secure a date for your panel presentation. I'll go through some of the length information in the next slide, but just an overview, that presentation is going to evaluate 12 key KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities. And I just wanted to go through those with you really quickly, even though it's not necessarily a scheduling piece, but just so that you're aware. Those 12 areas are going to include reflection on the level of creativity that you had in the program that you presented, demonstrating initiative. So if you gave thoughts to what might happen beyond what you've been asked for, it'll evaluate your interpersonal skills. That's part of the presentation component of that. And so that's why this is in 2 parts. There are some things that you can write really well, but you need to have a face-to-face interaction with to really demonstrate your capabilities. And that's what that panel presentation helps you with. But also take a look at management skills, your ability to multitask, some flexibility if things don't go to plan, what you would do, your time management, understanding multiple communications tools, those platforms for delivery. It'll evaluate your speaking skills, writing and editing, also listening so that when you're interacting with your fellow panelists, that they can get a sense for how you work as a PR practitioner. And then of course your presentation skills. So those are just some of the things to keep in mind on what's going to be evaluated. That panel presentation, the panelists will provide a recommendation of whether you advance or don't advance, and I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. And you'll receive official word from UAB within 3 to 4 weeks of that panel presentation. So as part of the flow of schedule, know that you'll present your panel presentation. Then the panel will confidentially make an assessment on whether you advance or do not advance. So you will not hear that directly after your panel presentation. You'll receive notification from the UAB within 3 to 4 weeks. If you do not advance, you will get some information about how you could have improved, and you'll be able to repeat your panel presentation after 90 days. So there is a 90-day wait period window, but you are allowed to re-present within that 1 year of fulfilling your APR. In preparing for that panel presentation, it's important to consider this sort of like a job interview. So you'll want to make sure that that you prepare all of your materials based on a program where you played a key role, whether that was solo or with a team. And then you'll use that program to answer the questionnaire as completely as possible, and that program will also inform your entire presentation. The work that you do, it could be paid or pro bono. It's more about the program itself. And then we would recommend that you organize your presentation that supports the filled questionnaire with either a PowerPoint is a strategy that a lot of people take, or some kind of hard copy portfolio if we're able to meet in person to go through that panel. And you should also consider examples of the work that you detail in that questionnaire. So if you supported that work with press releases, or if you had ads or graphics that were built to the campaign, if there's media coverage that demonstrates the work that you did, that should all be part of your presentation to help bring your questionnaire to life. Again, we noted that your plan could have had holes in what was implemented, because we know in real life you don't always get to do all of the things that you would like to do. But again, you should be prepared to explain what some of those challenges were and what you would have done if you had the resources or ability to do them completely. That panel presentation is evaluated with a total of 36 available points, and you need to score at least 24 points to get an advance. And that includes not having a 0 in any of the 12 KSAs that we talked about a moment ago. For format, as we mentioned, you'll have 3 APRs from PRSA Detroit who will serve as your evaluators. You'll have up to 2 hours to deliver that presentation, but you're requested to have a minimum of 1 hour. So that's to make sure that you have a comprehensive take on the questionnaire that you completed. And that presentation should include your completed questionnaire when you bring it. So you'll deliver your completed questionnaire electronically to Jen and myself prior to your presentation, but you also should bring a copy of that questionnaire with you to the presentation.
Hey, Kristen, yeah. Really quickly. So we have a question from Bob. He wants to know the materials you present in the questionnaire, do they have to be based on your current employer, or can it be any project or campaign you've done in recent years, either with a client or a previous employer?
For that questionnaire and your presentation, you can choose any PR program that you have implemented that you feel would most fully answer the questions and represent your work. So it could be from a current employer if you choose, but it could be from work you've done, 3, 4, or more years ago, if it comprehensively describes what you would do as a PR practitioner.
Okay, perfect. And then as a follow-on question, he wants to know what our thoughts are about whether or not the APR is really necessary if you've been in the profession for 20 years or more.
So that's a good question and a common question. I think that some of that is personal, and Jen, I ask you to come in with some opinions too. I think some of that is personal, but as we alluded to earlier in the presentation, sometimes just years of experience aren't enough, especially for positions where they're APR preferred, where that might get you in the door sooner rather than later. Anything that would give you a leg up would, of course, be important. But one of the things to consider about APR and whether you want to take part in it is, sometimes after 20 years, it's helpful to come back to some of those skills and make sure that you're not missing anything. So for me personally, coming from the agency side, we often take pieces of programs rather than comprehensive programs. And so sometimes you can get mired down in strategy and tactics when there are really objectives that you need to be working toward. And so after having a couple decades of experience, coming back to those fundamental skills can make you a better practitioner.
And I would just piggyback on that as well, having been, again, transitioning from journalism to communications. I think I was in the communications profession for about a decade before I pursued my APR, and again, learning everything on the job. I was the executive director for communications for Detroit Public Schools, which is no small feat. However, it was amazing to me once I went through the pursuit of the APR program, how it continued to change my thinking. And I saw a question, I couldn't see the whole question, that has something to do with the grounding in research. It steeps you in this idea that you should really research and base your communications plans and strategies on, as Kristen mentioned, goals and objectives. There's so much depth that you get into through the APR program that I'm truly believe that it permanently changed the way I think about how to effectively do communications. And I'm sure that it would benefit any 20-year practitioner. As a 12-year journalist and then a 10-year practitioner, it was certainly a wonderful benefit for me.
Yeah, I would, just to add on to that, I would echo all those comments from Kristen and Jen. I have a little bit of a different experience, as that I was young in my career when I went through. However, I myself have 20 plus years as a practicing PR professional, and I do find myself going back to the basics. Just as a refresher, when I'm building out campaigns, specifically to Kristen's point around, I think we get so tied up in the execution and the implementation of a campaign that it's important that we sometimes overlook those strategies and objectives. And so I find myself going back to those basics. And it really does, for me, it's really given me a foundation and a grounding in the profession. So, and that was a personal goal for myself. Just really quickly before we move on, we have another question from Dave. It's about the research. He just wants to know, he says, I know that research is a part of the consideration for the program that you highlight in the presentation. However, if you're going to highlight a crisis communications plan where research isn't always possible, how does that factor into your evaluation?
So what I would say to that is, you're right. Research isn't full breadth of research isn't always possible in every program. However, even in a crisis situation, you're still thinking about and putting together what would inform what you ultimately plan and implement and put together. So that research could be more specific to that crisis plan, that limited scope. But the other thing that you can do as part of your questionnaire is talk about research in general outside of that program. So you are able to demonstrate knowledge if it's outside of the scope of the program that you're using as the core of your presentation. But it would still behoove you to, as part of your questionnaire, as part of your presentation, to demonstrate an understanding of, if we had all of the capabilities in the world, if we had the time to do the type of research we wanted to do in a crisis scenario, here's what that would look like. Are there any other questions that you think we should go through at this point, Cynthia? Or?
No, that's it.
Great, and thank you. Those are really good questions. Coming back to the format of the panel presentation, I just wanted to alert all of our participants that we understand that as of right now, it is difficult for anyone to have an in-person panel presentation, and we're not sure how long that may last. So in general, it is of course a better experience for everyone if we can do it in person, but we have heard from PRSA National that doing virtual presentations is okay. So I don't want you to be dissuaded from participating in a panel presentation thinking that that's not a possibility. We would just need to have a little bit of flexibility and care in what that would look like. And so Jen and myself will be happy to help coordinate and provide resources so that you can still deliver to a panel your presentation either to this timeline or within the year that you're completing your APR. So we've already gone through a couple of these notes here, just reiterating again that you'll get an advance or not advance, and that will allow you to then think about and participate in the computer-based questionnaire. But before we get to that, just a few general tips. We recommend that you really do think about this as an academic exercise. As we noted, experience is important, especially as you're talking about what programs you've implemented and providing that well-rounded scope. But you do need to study to succeed. And so what I would recommend is that even starting to think about the terminology that's included in the study guide that Jen will talk about in a minute and the texts that are going to be recommended for you, making sure that you're incorporating some of that terminology into your questionnaire and panel presentation, again, so that you can provide the fullest picture of your experience, knowledge, and also use that as an opportunity to essentially prepare for that questionnaire later. We also recommend that you stick to something that you're most familiar with. So if you don't do a lot of crisis management, it would not be the best idea to use that as your example. We're really looking for something that would be your most well-rounded experience. So please think carefully about what you think best represents your work as a PR practitioner. Again, if your experience is a little bit narrow, for example, if your sole focus is on internal communications, where you wouldn't do a lot of media relations, you'll still need to make sure that you at least have an understanding of some of the PR skills that maybe you're not required to implement on a daily basis, but that you know exist and are important to the profession overall. And you'll get a sense for some of that too through your course of study, where you may need to beef up on other public relations practitioner skills outside of what you currently practice commonly each day. Once you get your advance, then you're able to move on to the computer-based exam, which I would love to pass over to my colleague Jen to take you through the expectations of that exam.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. Great overview with lots of information on the panel presentation and the steps to achieve your APR. So the computer-based exam, as you see here, is broken down into knowledge, skills, and abilities in these various categories. This pie chart is really handy, and I would encourage you when you receive this presentation to keep it. I'm pretty sure it's in the study guide that we'll talk about as well. But the wonderful thing is it gives you an indication of how the test is broken down, the percentages of the focus of the test. So you'll see here 8% in that little gray-white area of the test is on communication models, theories, and history, while 33% of the exam is based on what we affectionately call RPI or RPIE, research, planning, implementation, and evaluation of programs. So for instance, you'll also see again, crisis management, 13%, ethics and law, 13%, et cetera. So when you're studying, you may want to consider spending the vast majority of your time in the pursuit of the research, planning, implementing and evaluation programs course of study, followed by business literacy, problem solving, and leadership. So for communication models and theories, there are certainly going to be a few questions on the test related to those, but you may not necessarily want to spend all your time recollecting what was going on during the World War I period and every single period in communications history, because there will be a lot of information in your textbooks on that. And there may even be a question or two, but recognize that the vast majority of what you'll want to be studying is in the areas that the test will have the greatest concentration on. Kristen, you can go on to the next slide. Also, and we can talk more if you have additional questions about what's on the test. This step 4 is talking a little bit about how you will schedule the computer-based exam, understanding that this may be a little different given the current situation. We know that there's efforts underway with National PRSA to have a proctored online exam, but the traditional way of going through the process is that you decide when at your leisure you'd like to take the exam and schedule it online through Prometric. It's a 3-hour and 45-minute exam that's administered on demand through these testing facilities, and you have a 10 to 15-minute optional break. Meanwhile, the clock still runs, so bear that in mind. The test is long and it's difficult, so you'll want to make sure, we can give you some tips on this later, but that you're well prepared, that you've eaten beforehand, that you're well hydrated, and all those sorts of things, knowing that you're going to be in that testing facility or taking the test for 3 hours and 45 minutes with this 10 to 15-minute optional break. I think Kristen would mention, we may have taken this test differently, that she once wanted or noted to me earlier that you also don't have to take all that time. If you whiz through that test in 2 hours, you can click submit and you can be done with it. I, however, felt the need to take probably all 3 hours and 45 minutes and go back and review every single question to make sure that I was had everything accomplished. There are 177 multiple choice questions. As you can see, 147 of those are graded and 30 beta questions that are being assessed for their usefulness and how well people understand those. You have to get 99 graded questions correct, 67% to pass. And while that may seem low, keep in mind that this course of study is rigorous. You're learning a lot of things, so that's a great achievement to be able to achieve 67% or hopefully much higher. The preliminary results, which is wonderful, are available immediately upon taking the test, but you will get your official notification from PRSA National. You could move on to the next slide, Kristen.
Yeah, one other thing to note in the typical format of the computer-based exam is that in general, they recommend that you schedule your appointment 30 days in advance to when you actually take it. So if we move back into the in-person capabilities of Prometrics, please keep that in mind. And then to Jen's note about National working on online proctored exam, they are hoping that they'll have more information about whether that's a possibility in the month of May.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Okay, so additional general tips for taking the test. So we talked about earlier that it's important to prioritize your study topics. This is, as Kristen mentioned, an academic pursuit. You really do need to study for this, and there's a lot of material that will be offered to you to be able to go through. It's recommended that you establish a study schedule because, again, there's a lot to go through, and since it's mostly a solo pursuit, unless you gather with some sort of cohort of students that you may want to study with, you will need to keep yourself on track. So we recommend that you establish a study schedule to get through the various knowledge skills and the KSAs that we mentioned earlier. The questions are mostly scenario-based, so they require you to generally give your best answer. Oftentimes, more than one answer may seem correct, so you'll want to go with your best line of thinking based on what you've learned throughout time. And again, there are a few memorization questions. So going back to that World War I example, don't expect that you're going to have a series of a bunch of questions throughout the test that are going to be testing you on someone's name or some period in history. There's mostly a lot of scenario-based questions, so you'll have to, it really steeps you in this idea of how you think about effective public relations. Importantly, you can flag questions for later review. So if you took the test the way I did, you will go back and you'll go through those questions that you flagged to double check and think about them. And really, it's while you're taking the test, it is certainly okay to feel like the exam is hard, because it is. So don't stress about that. Understand that if you don't pass the first time, it's okay. You can retry. There are a number of people who didn't pass on the first time and they tried again and they succeeded. If you do have to retake the exam, you have to pay a fee. But if you pass the first time, it's exciting that PRSA National gives you a bit of a rebate. And I forgot about this when that check came in the mail. So that was very exciting. It was an added bonus to getting my APR pin. A little next on preparation resources. So you can advance to the next slide, Kristen. Managing information overload. So really quickly, again, we talked a little bit about how you want to prioritize your study topics, establish a study schedule, and leverage support resources. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And with that, we really do believe that you're going to get to the final sunshine circle here of success. So Kristen, if you can move on to the next, some of the national accreditation resources. So these are great. There are just a ton of resources, and you'll find a lot of them at praccreditation.org. There is an awesome candidate panel presentation instruction guide that gives the very detailed run through of what Kristen described earlier. There are a host of recommended textbooks where when we talk to you about tips just a little bit later, we'll tell you what some of those recommended textbooks are, but there's a list of them throughout the PRSA resources. There is a wonderful study guide that is available online free, and we will encourage you to print that out. I just found mine the other day, and it's a giant behemoth of a guide, but it's wonderful. So highly recommended to print that out. It will go over everything that you need to know. And there's an online course that you can do if you so choose. I can talk about that a little bit later in tips because I went through that prep course. And there is an awesome, Dave, I see your question. It was extremely worth it. I'll just answer that question right now. Dave asks, did anyone go for it and was it worth it? I would say that that was invaluable to me. I'm not sure that I could have passed the test if I did not do that. I've actually been going through my master's at the same time that I went through the accreditation process, and I really needed this established study schedule where you go through 10 modules, and there are great practice questions throughout that are also scenario based. So I found that the online prep course was magnificent. They also have an additional opportunity to have panel presentations that others review. So you get to watch other people reviewing their panels before a panel of APR experts. So it really gives you a great idea of what you may be going through. You can also, if I recall, offer to present your panel presentation and get feedback on that to a panel of experts as well. So I thought it was excellent. And then finally, again, the APR online sample test, that's almost a necessity because it gives you an example of how the test will be taken in some of those great scenario-based questions. We can go on to the next slide. Thank you. And a wonderful resource that we would be happy to coordinate with you are the PRSA Detroit mentors. So having a mentor, which we would help to connect any of you to, can of course share their insight and guidance and answer questions on the accreditation process, which is admittedly, especially at the beginning, seems a little bit confusing. There's a lot to digest on the process alone, let alone the course of study. So a mentor could be a really invaluable resource to help offer support and guidance. You could also seek guidance from an accredited colleague or friend who might be willing to, and hopefully they would, share information with you about the process and the course of study. We would have you request, if you so choose, to be paired with a mentor, and then we would work with you to find someone who matches with the sorts of things that you are looking for in a mentor, and then we would virtually introduce the mentor and mentee. We want you to know, however, that it's the responsibility of the APR mentor and mentee to determine the structure and the format and the frequency. So that would be really up to you to determine how you want to make use of that opportunity along with your assigned mentor. And so with that, before we go on to next steps, I'm just going to give you a few extra tips that I used while working to study for the APR, and then both Cynthia and Kristen will do the same. So really quickly, some of the wonderful resources that I used, you'll see that there are a number of books, as we mentioned. One of my favorites was the Effective Public Relations book. And there are, again, a host of them. I probably bought 5 or 6, but I really relied on Effective Public Relations to help get me through the program. It covered pretty much, I think, everything you needed to know. I think the online course, as I mentioned, was awesome. Anybody who has any questions about that can reach out to me separately. I'm happy to answer any questions. The study guide is invaluable. I highly recommend, again, to print that out and use your highlighter with, just like wild, because you'll use that and refer to it regularly. And then I actually asked, and thank you, Cynthia, and your teammate, for helping connect me with a mentor. My mentor really helped me, especially in the beginning, to understand the process. And then she took a look at my panel presentation to offer feedback whether I was really going in the right direction. So I thought that was wonderful. Another quick tip, I used flashcards. Mine were generally on paper. So whenever I was at the grocery store or the bookstore or wherever, if I was just going on a walk, I had my little flashcards to help me remember things. And one of my favorite things that I learned right toward the end is that Alexa is a great study partner. Alexa can be used, granted she relies on Wikipedia, which most of us would not recommend to cite as a resource in some research paper, but she can really help you if you're alone in your course of study and trying to remember some of those theories and even the historical periods and those sorts of things. You can ask Alexa and she will help you out. With that, I'd love to turn it around to Kristen to give your tips as well.
So many of my tips actually echo Jen's. I found Cutlip and Center's Effective Public Relations book to be very comprehensive, and they used terminology that was similar to what you would experience on the test. As we know, sometimes using the specific terms in their intended way can be a challenge, especially if you've been out of the game for a while. So that book really brought some clarity to that, as well as the study guide. For me, I'm a type of person where I need to write to think. So I took an outline strategy of the Effective Public Relations book and sort of calling out the key details that I wanted. That was especially important to me because I borrowed the book from Amazon. And so I wanted to make sure I had all of the information accessible to me, even beyond what I paid for to borrow the book. So that's something that you may want to consider. I also used a flashcard strategy, but I used flashcard apps that you can use on your phone and computer so that I could access them whenever I needed to. And there are other PR practitioners across the country who've made their own flashcards. So I found those to be helpful resources too in thinking about content that I hadn't necessarily thought to study. I also used a mentor. I had my mentor help me out with my questionnaire. I had a little bit of trouble in thinking about how I might structure some of my response, or if I had been clear enough in some of my responses, because sometimes when it's in your own head, it makes complete sense to you, but for someone else who's reading it, making sure that it was comprehensive and detailed. So that was invaluable to me. One of the other things that I think was really helpful in my course of study, because I did it in a very short time frame. I did mine over a summer instead of an entire year. So I started studying with the Cut-Lip book before I even started filling out my questionnaire. So that was especially important in the research, planning, implementation, and evaluation portions of what I was doing in the questionnaire and in studying for the test. So in reading those chapters before I even started filling the questionnaire out, it helped me incorporate some of that terminology, making sure I was covering all of the theory that is necessary for those sections. So I would strongly recommend that anyone who goes through the program is to begin your course of study even before you finish and submit your questionnaire. Cynthia, is there anything that you would like to add?
Boy, I feel like I was kind of, we didn't have all those resources when I went through. I guess just to some of my study patterns were very similar to Kristen and Jen. The note cards, I had old school 3x5 index cards. There was no apps back then. God, I sound horribly old. But yeah, I did note cards, index note cards. What I did is, for me, I'm a visual learner as well. So I relied as well on the Cut-Lip textbook. I borrowed that book from a colleague. And then I worked back from the deadlines that were given to the pool of candidates who were going through at the time with me. So I factored in personal commitments, professional commitments, and then realistically charted back from those deadlines that were part of the program to figure out how much time I could realistically dedicate to studying each night. And then I would up my study time on the weekends. Like I said, the flashcards were an immense help. I took notes, similar to what Kristen did, but mine were more like bullet points on the flashcards. I printed off all of the online materials that are, well, at the time they weren't online. We actually had to physically go into a classroom and listen to the presenters speak, and they had handouts. And so those became my study guide. I did seek out a mentor on my own who happened to be a colleague of mine at the agency that I was at. That was an invaluable relationship. I had him review my questionnaire, my actual the campaign that I was going to be presenting, and then he was able to give me some tips and tricks on sitting for the computer-based exam. So I would highly recommend a mentor. But yeah, you have to figure out what works best for you. I mean, you know, in the way that you operate and the other commitments that you have going on. But you do need to commit to studying. So, and there's tons of resources that are available for any candidates who are, you know, considering going through the process. And Jen, Kristen, and I are here to help, you know, anyone through that process with any questions or connecting anyone to any specific resources they might be having a difficult time finding on their own. So, that was pretty much my experience.
Thanks, Cynthia. So in going back over some of what we already talked about as regards to next steps, in thinking about some of the deadlines that we've established, if you want to follow along in the Detroit PRSA's recommended timeline, and again, noting that we understand and acknowledge that we may need to have some flexibility in these deadlines given our current environment, but in general, we strongly recommend that you have submitted your application by June 10th and then notified Jen and myself so that we can help you connect with any of the resources we've described today. We're recommending that you have your questionnaire completed and in to Jen and myself by July 29th. That signifies for us that you're ready to have a panel scheduled, which we would work with you on the week of August 10th. To schedule. So that's why there's a to be determined on when you would actually give your presentation. And then from there, assuming that everything goes swimmingly, that you have done all of the hard work and been successful, you'll get an advance. So then you can take the computer-based exam at your leisure, but within 1 year of your application acceptance. So please keep that in mind. What your acceptance date is, so you know when you have to have your computer-based exam completed by. Assuming you're able to follow on our timeline, we're hoping that you would be able to take that computer-based exam prior to the November meeting, so then you can be pinned and receive all of the honors and recognition due to you at the annual meeting in November. One of the things to consider too, and I'm mindful of everyone's time, is that once you achieve your APR, there is a need to maintain it. So once you finally get those letters behind your name, you'll get your official certificate saying that you are accredited. You do need to renew that. And so you have you're accredited for 3 years at a time. In that 3 years, you need to accumulate 10 points in 3 different categories that include continuing education, professionalism, and community service. Those 10 points are pretty easy to achieve. There are a lot of different options that contribute to those points, and different activities are worth different levels of points. So for example, if you were taking an academic course of study that was worth 4 credit hours, that would be worth 4 points, versus if you attend a webinar or a half-day event, that may only be worth 1 point. But they spell that point structure out very clearly in your renewal packet. The other thing to consider is that you will need to submit a $75 renewal fee every 3 years to maintain your accreditation. In addition to that, you do need to continue to be a member in good standing with PRSA National and your chapter.